Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we continued with the story of Samson. We looked at Judges chapter 15, and Judges 15 picks up from where we left off last week. So last week, it was Samson's wedding where he took a Philistine for a wife, and he tried to play a trick on the Philistines by giving them a riddle that they couldn't solve, and they were able to use his wife to find out the answer to the riddle. And so then he proceeded to go and kill a bunch of Philistines in order to give the promise cloth that he had promised them, right? So, and he's really mad, and he leaves. And so the bride's father gives the bride to Samson's friend, his companion. So our story picks up this week with Samson returning to find that his bride has been given away to someone else. And he decides that this is a great thing because now I have no reason to not attack these guys who got the better of me, right? So what he chooses to do is he chooses to be ironic. Samson's a guy who loves poetry and being kind of comedic with the way he punishes people. And so he gets a bunch of foxes, he ties them together by the tail and lights a torch in there, and he sends them into the fields. And this was the harvest season, so it was very dry, and so the fields just burn up. The wheat burns up, the olive trees burn up. So basically everything that they had been saving for the winter is gone. And so what the Philistines going to do? Well, they find out who did it. It was Samson. They go and they kill his wife and her father. And then Samson goes, well, now that you've done that, because they're still technically legally married, so it's still like an attack on Samson. So Samson then goes and he kills a bunch of them, right? But that's not all. He's not done yet, because the Philistines want to get revenge for that. So they go to the men of Judah. They start raiding Judah's towns in Lehi. And the men of Judah don't know what's going on. They figure out that it's because Samson is causing all this trouble. So they go to basically arrest Samson and hand him over to the Philistines, right? They tie him up, and you'll see that this is really similar to what we'll see next time we're in this, right, with Delilah and Samson, and how he's tied up, right? And so they tie him up, they send him back to the Philistines, and this is what Samson wants, right? He just wants to make sure they're not going to kill him, and they're not, right? They're going to give him to the Philistines so the Philistines can kill him. And when that happens, when he shows up, right, it says the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and the ropes, right, they had tied him with 2 ropes, new ones, so they're strong, were like flax that had caught on fire, and they could just melt off of his body. And then he kills 1,000 Philistines. He finds a jawbone of a donkey and kills them, right? So that's what happens. And then Samson gloats, and he has a little poem that he says, right? He says, with the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men. And it's a poem in Hebrew, and depending on your translation, sometimes they might rhyme it to show that. But he kills a bunch of people. So he gets rid of the jawbone, and this is him, continually being this, even though he's doing a lot of these things out of selfish motives or for like revenge and things like that, you can see that God is using him to get back at the Philistines. So even though he's not being the best, right? He's violating his covenant pretty often, right? He doesn't seem to care all that much about certain things. He still is being used by God. And then we have something that seems really similar to another part of the Bible when he speaks to God after this, right? So he's just killed 1,000 guys and he's thirsty, and so he says, like, why have you let me do this awesome thing just so I can die of thirst? And so he this to me reminded me a lot of the Moses story, where Moses is leading the Israelites, right? And the Israelites are complaining. They're like, why have you let us out of Egypt just so we can die of thirst in the wilderness, right? And he hits the rock, and the rock produces water, and everyone's fine, right? Similar story right here. And Samson shows a lack of faith in God that is similar to what his ancestors showed as they were going through the wilderness. So you can see that Samson is leading Israel, but he's not leading Israel in the way the earliest judges did, and he's not bringing complete deliverance to Israel, right? Because it says that he's a judge for 20 years, but still during that 20 years, the Philistines are in control. That's how our passage ends, right? And that's actually really interesting because, one, that phrase, right, he judged Israel for such and such time, usually ends the narrative, right? That's what the judge dies. But for Samson, that's not when he dies, right? We have a whole another chapter with Samson's life when he dies at the end of that. And so we also see that Samson doesn't, as a major judge, doesn't rule as long as everyone else. The only one who he's longer ruled than is Jephthah, who's for 7 years. But all the other ones rule for like 40 years and stuff like that. So you can see that Samson, even though he does this great stuff, his rule isn't a isn't a particularly holy or prosperous one, but God is still using him. And I mean, that's the story of Samson in total. So when we pick this back up in 2 weeks, I'm not going to be here next week because I'll be in my honeymoon, but 2 weeks from then we'll be able to continue. So I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.